All right, hi sixth grade, it is me, Miss Mack again, and I am going to be doing a review of what you just learned with Mr. Waka at Molina Station. So for an experiment must be testable. So it must include at least 2 sets of materials and it must have one material switched out. So what this means, you should already know. We have 2 sets of materials here. We have one set over here and we have one set over here. This means we have one red food dye over here, one pipette over here, 200 milliliters of water over here, and one Erlenmeyer flask over here, just this set. Now this set has exactly what this set has. It has one red food dye, it has one pipette, it has 200 milliliters of water, and it has one Erlenmeyer flask. This is what we mean by 2 sets. We have one set over here, one set over here. They are the same. Now, an experiment has to have 2 sets of materials. We have that here, but it at least has to have one material switched out. So we need one material switched out, only one. And for the example in the PowerPoint, we switched out the red food dye to have green food dye instead. So over here, we have everything the same. We have one pipette, we have 200 milliliters of water, we have an Erlenmeyer flask, but then we have green food dye over here. Over here, we have one pipette, we have 200 milliliters of water, we have one Erlenmeyer flask, but we have red food dye. That's the difference. So we have 2 sets of materials that are exactly the same, except for one thing is switched out, and we switched out the food dye. So, what if instead of the food dye, we switched out something else? So I have red food dye here again. What if we switched out the container? What if we had, instead of this Erlenmeyer flask, what if we had just a plain old regular mason jar? So over here, we have 200 milliliters of water, we have a pipette, we have red food dye, and we have an Erlenmeyer flask. Over here, we have the red food dye, as over here. We have the pipette, we have the 200 milliliters of water, but it's in a mason jar instead. So we still have 2 sets of materials, and we have one material switched out, and that would be the mason jar instead of the Erlenmeyer flask. Now this is still water, this is still red food dye, this is still a pipette. Just the mason jar is different. So, what if we, instead of switching out the mason jar for the Erlenmeyer flask, what if we switched out just the pipette, just how we were going to drop out the red food dye? If I took this away. So now we have an Erlenmeyer flask, 200 milliliters of water, and red food dye over here. That's one set. And for the other set, we have red food dye. We have a pipette now, 200 milliliters of and an Erlenmeyer flask. So the sets are the same, except for one thing, and that is the pipette. For this one, I might draw out the red food dye and then drop it with the pipette. For this one, I might just pop in the red food dye just by itself. So now we have 2 sets of materials, we're good there, and we have one material switched out, the pipette. So we are making this experiment more scientific. Now you can do the rest of your Google Classroom assignment and take the Google Forms quiz that is linked in the Google Classroom assignment.